Alright guys, we're back. Episode 2, Whiteboard Chronicles, Should I Buy a Home in 2016? Thank you for the support last week. Let's jump right into this week and see what the information tells us. Very important topic once again. Should I buy a home in 2016? Should I buy a home? Very important question, especially relaying off of last week, where if you were watching that material, it would be very easy to assume from the information I showed you last week that no, 2016 would not be a good year to buy a home. So, I want to get into that, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but let's go through the information and the facts and the stats. Relatively, the prices are up right now in Southern California. But if you look at the trends of real estate, or really any sort of investment, but they go through waves, but the waves always on real estate typically had to go up. So, with that being said, prices are going to continue to go up. So, by that I mean prices right now are not, they're not the peak. They're going to keep going up, So let's kind of look at those stats a little bit. The price of houses increased 7.1%. That's a big number, okay? So what's it going to do this year, right? That's what matters. So this year in 2016, prices are estimated to go up anywhere from 0.5%. Anywhere from 5 to 6.5% more this year alone. So, I know you don't add percentages, but you can get a decent idea. And that's going to be, around 12% increase, in 2 years' time. And then if we want to look at 5 years, what are the prices going to do in 5 years? 4.5% up. Up. So, last year, 7.1%. This year, 5% to 6.5% increase. Next 5 years, 3.1% increase to a 4.5% increase. So, I think if you look at what I'm looking at, that's fairly significant numbers. That's around 16% increase over the next 5 years. So, in other words, if you bought now, you're buying, here instead of up here. Okay, another huge incentive to buy is that interest rates have remained around 4% basically the whole year. And in San Diego, they're typically lower than that, closer to between 3 and 4%. And those are projected to rise by almost everyone over the next 12 months. Now, interest rates rising, 4% versus 5% doesn't sound like a big difference. But, to put that in perspective, you're going to be paying a tremendous amount more on your mortgage each month just from having a 1%. A 1% increase makes a massive difference in your mortgage. Okay. $320,000 is the mortgage on this guy, okay? So, at 3%, your mortgage total with a 3% interest over a 30-year span is going to be $485,688, okay? That's for 3%. Let's go ahead and look at 4%. $549,982. You're creeping up on a $100,000 difference you're going to be paying over 30 years just from 1% interest rate. Okay, now, I know you're probably concerned more with the monthly difference, but that's tremendous. Think how much money that is in your pocket for, whatever else you want to do with it than just spending it on interest, So, the monthly payments, though, for 3%, $1,528. $1,528. And that's a difference $179 every month for 30 years. So what if it's 5%? $1,718, which is a total of $369 per month more than it is at 3% for 30 years. $369 a month for 30 years. I can't emphasize enough how major that is. So, I mean, you hear people talk about interest rates and it's like, oh, 0.5%, ooh, 0.25%, oh, 1%, big deal. That's a huge deal. I mean, really, that is part of the reason that I said in the last video why so many homes are selling, because people are smart. They don't want to pay $100,000 in interest. You know, they just don't. And honestly, these are historically low interest rates. I mean, being even around 3% is crazy. We're never going to see that again in our lifetimes. Odds are good we're not. So this is something I think first-time home buyers got to see, and they got to think about that. This is only going to last this year before going up. So for those of you dilly-dallying around, I think now that it's visual, you can see how tremendous of a difference 1 point or a half a point makes on your mortgage payment, number one, but also how much money you're going to end up paying. I mean, look at this. This house is only $400,000. And at 4% interest rate, here's what you're paying. That's an extra $149,982 just on interest. So another thing that I think is getting to a lot of people nowadays is getting trapped in rent. So rent steadily increases over time, whereas if you get a 30-year mortgage and you're locked in at such and such rate, your mortgage right now would probably be less than whatever rent you're paying. Typically that's what I find. That's not always true. Of course, if you buy a really expensive house and you're living in you know, an average house, that may not always be true, but typically if you move from a house of the same caliber to buying a house of the same caliber, your mortgage is going to be less and you're locked in at that rate. Whereas if you're a renter, your landlord's got control to put those prices up over time. Landlords have a lot of leverage over renters, so it's easy to get caught in that trap and kind of in a way give away control to someone else over your living space. So that's another positive of buying, and especially going back to those interest rates, it really is a pretty dang good time to buy a place, and especially if you look at rents. Rents in San Diego have really climbed quite high and quite fast in a very short period of time. So that's another thing I want y'all to consider, especially those of you in San Diego, because you know how much rents here are, and I think from a comfort level, it's far more comfortable to know you're locked in at this rate for an extended period of time and not have to worry about your rent being bumped up a couple $100s a year or whatever it may be. So Harvard released 5 things that are benefits of owning homes. Okay, number 1. Housing is typically the one leveraged investment available. Okay. You're paying for housing whether you buy or rent. There's no way around this. You're paying for housing whether you buy or you rent. The one difference with rent is you're not going to see that money again. That money's gone. You know, I mean, you might as well throw it away. You know, I mean, you're getting a product for it, but you're never seeing it again. Whereas this money, if you buy, all that money's doing is building up your net worth. The house is going to appreciate over time, and you're probably paying less than you are for rent. So I really like that one because it's very simple, and you know, I think it's pretty easy to see the logic behind number 2. Okay, so let's move on to number 3. Okay. Number 3, buying is usually a form of forced savings. Alright, a lot of people have problems saving money, and when you buy a house, you know, it's really a form of saving because you're putting money into something that you own and you have the right to turn around and sell if you want. And remember that if you occupy a house for 2 of the last 5 years, any gains that you make selling it go untaxed as well. So that's another benefit of this. But basically it's a way to tie up your own funds and kind of ensure that you have something you're sitting on, net worth, like I said in the last one, and there's value there. So that's a really big one. And with that being said, I'm going to skip to number 5. We'll come back to number 4 on Harvard's list. Number 5 is hedge against inflation. This is a fantastic hedge against inflation. And, with the rate we're printing money in America, if all that money that's offshore comes in, there's a very high chance we're going to see a significant amount of inflation. So owning a house is probably, unless you own land just by itself, probably the best hedge against inflation. So buying a car isn't really going to do much for you. Buying gold, I guess, would be pretty good, but housing really is pretty ideal, and you get the benefits of number 1, 2, 3, and 4 on this list as well as number 5. So let's bounce back to number 4. Okay, there are substantial tax benefits to owning. Okay, so percentage of income needed for rent, and this is medians. That's 25%. 25% is needed historically just to rent a home of your income. That's a lot. To me, that sounds like a lot. 30.1% is needed of your income just to rent a home. Guys, that's a lot of money. So let's see, what is it for owning? 22%. So 3% lower than renting historically. That's quite a bit, 3%. We went over how much a percent makes a difference when you talk large numbers, so this is major. But right now, let's take a look. 15.3% of income typically needed to own a median house. I mean, that's half. It's just about half. That's crazy. When I pulled these numbers and was doing the research for this really surprised me. And that's major stuff. So when you look at things like this and you look at what I was talking about earlier when I compared the 3%, the 4%, the 5%, it makes it a pretty attractive time to buy. And when the pen hits the pad and you see the numbers, I think it really makes clear that 2016 with these interest rates is really pretty ideal, and with the skyrocketing rents. Okay guys, so one last point before I wrap up this video. On average, a person who owns a home for 30 years will gain $217,726 of net worth over that period of time, just from owning the house. I mean, that's really significant. So that's something, another thing to consider is there's very few ways to kind of build up your net worth that much and enjoy the product the whole time as well. So another thing to keep in mind, guys. Thank you for watching. Again, if you have any questions, please contact me, james@judsonrealestate.net, James Visser on Facebook, and James Visser on Instagram. I really appreciate you guys watching these videos. Go ahead and like and subscribe on YouTube, and in the comment section, go ahead and leave any suggestions you have for future videos, and thank you guys for watching.